Hello and welcome to our on-demand webinar, NDIS 101, How to Implement. My name is Marcus Rose. I'm a marketing member here at SAI Global, and I'll be the moderator for this session. Before we begin the webinar, I'd like to run through some brief housekeeping. As this webinar is on demand, please feel free to use the questions button on the right side of your screen if you have any questions. We will endeavour to respond to your questions at a later time. Our presenters today include Paddy Wassenaar and Rod Beef. Paddy is a technical manager in Disability and Human Services at SAI Global. Paddy has a strong background in quality management systems, coupled with over 15 years lead auditor experience in the disability and human services sector, as well as training and mentoring staff. She is also responsible for ensuring SAI Global meets its accreditation requirements for JASANs and related government bodies. Rod Beef is a senior education professional who brings over 20 years of corporate industry experience to SAI Global. Rod has had extensive experience in practical applications of management systems, including training in auditing and implementing techniques of quality, environmental, occupational health and safety management systems, as well as process improvement. Today, we'll be going through the NDIS Audit Program, how to be compliant to the NDIS program, and how to implement a management system. Over to Paddy.
Thank you. So we'll start with what the NDIS Audit Program is actually about. On the 1st of July 2018, so this year, the National Disability Insurance Commission took over from previous regulatory bodies in South Australia and New South Wales, and they are now the new independent body regulating the NDIS market in Australia. So the NDIS ultimately will replace all the quality and safeguards arrangements that are currently operating in the different states and territories. So at the moment, different states have different requirements. So by 2020, everyone will have to follow the same set of rules. Audits need to be conducted by an auditing body that is approved by the NDIS Commission and also must have JASAN's accreditation. Those auditing bodies are called approved quality auditors under the scheme, but they're more commonly known as certification bodies. The audit requirements, modules and audit types are formally published as the NDIS Provider Registration and Practice Standards Rules 2018. They're available on the NDIS Commission website, and there's a link in the presentation slide so you can find them easily. Now, the NDIS practice standards are formally published, again, as the National Disability Insurance Scheme Provider Registration and Practice Standard Rules. Those rules include the standards themselves, but also include the requirements for providers so they know whether they need a verification audit or a certification audit, and we'll explain those differences later. The standard itself, including the different modules and the requirements that sit under those modules, are also available through the NDIS Commission website, and there's a link there on the slide that takes you to the standard itself, which is a much easier to read version of the standard for those doing the implementation. Depending on the type of service you provide, there are different modules that need to be audited against. So what is the difference between NDIS registration and an audit? Now, the NDIS Commission is actually responsible for the registration of service providers. That's organisations delivering services to NDIS participants. A certification or a verification audit is part of the requirements that they have for registration, and it's not the only thing that they look for. SAI Global can do the certification or verification audits that form part of that registration because we are an approved quality auditor. So we've been approved by the Commission to do these audits to make sure that your system meets all the requirements of the relevant standards and modules. As I said earlier, the audit is only part of what the NDIS Commission will consider as part of your registration. So there are two types of audits, and the type depends on what sort of organisation you are and how big the organisation is, and the risk of the registration groups that you're delivering to participants. A verification is performed if you're a sole trader or a partnership, and that is a desktop audit that's only against Module 6 of your documentation and records. A verification is normally conducted once every 3 years and is only applicable for sole traders and partnerships delivering low-risk registration group services. Those published rules, the link that we referred to earlier, will show a table that indicates whether you need verification or certification. For proprietary limited companies or organisations delivering higher risk registration groups or specialist registration groups, certification is needed. Now that's a much larger audit, so it includes a stage 1 or off-site audit of your documentation. And that's to check whether you're actually ready and whether you have the systems and processes in place for the certification audit itself. The Stage 2 certification audit is conducted on site and includes not just the review of your documentation and systems and records, but interviews with NDIS participants as well and reviewing their files. So an important part of that audit is to get feedback from participants about your service delivery. For certification, there's a full certification audit against all the module requirements once every 3 years, and then annual surveillance audits are conducted as well. And for a surveillance audit, it looks at about 50% of the requirements of all the modules. After 3 years, a recertification audit is conducted.
Great, thanks, Patty. We now have time for a quick poll question. So based off the information that we've just heard, do you know which audit you require? A verification, a certification, or you're still unsure? I'll give you about 30 seconds to answer. Great, thank you.
Now, across Australia, there are different timeframes for rollout of the new NDIS scheme and the audits. So from July 2018, audits are commencing in New South Wales and South Australia for providers. In July 2019, the scheme will roll out to almost the rest of Australia, and in July 2020, Western Australia will follow. If you have services in Victoria and Queensland and currently need to meet those state certification requirements, they will remain in place until the 30th of June 2018 for services delivering services to people with disability. So why do I need to have an audit? Now, government departments are always very concerned about spending public money and making sure that the service providers have good systems and processes in place so they can deliver a good quality service to NDIS participants. So these audits are mandatory for all providers delivering services to NDIS participants and form part of the NDIS registration. So when do you need to have an audit? You will get some notification from the Commission to let you know when your audit is due. So that normally takes the form of a letter. You do need to go online to the NDIS portal and complete a self-assessment. Once you've done that, an initial scope of audit document gets generated, and that outlines the different registration groups, some information about your organisation, and also the type of audit needed and the modules that need to be audited. That initial scope of audit document is what approved quality auditors like SAI Global use to make sure that we're auditing you against the right modules and doing a full audit for what you need. If you're in doubt, please contact the NDIS Commission to check your requirements. If you're an existing provider, the renewal target date is when you will need to reapply to the NDIS Commission. So there are some brand new providers who don't have any participants yet. So of course that means we don't have participants to interview. So in that case, we do a provisional audit. The audit is still the same, so there is still a stage 1 audit and a stage 2 audit. The main difference being that we don't interview participants as part of that audit. Because that means there's a little bit less work in the audit, we might get permission by the NDIS Commission to use a single auditor. Normally audits would be done by a team of 2 people. Approval though is on a case-by-case basis, and we must gain approval from the NDIS Commission every time we want to use a single auditor for a certification audit. After a provisional audit, a qualified certification decision is made. So how is the audit delivered? What happens during an audit? For a verification, it only looks at the requirements of Module 6 of the NDIS practice standards. Evidence against all of the criteria under that module need to be checked, and evidence is uploaded by providers to the NDIS portal. Now, some providers have been having a little bit of difficulty uploading evidence, and that's okay because you can send it to the auditor as well to review as part of that. Now, evidence can include documentation such as organisations, policies, procedures, any work instructions you have, any forms or information that you provide to participants. Evidence also needs to include records such as insurance policies, staff pre-employment screening records such as police check evidence, records of complaints, and anything else that you want to submit that shows how you comply against Module 6, the verification module. For a certification audit, that normally includes the core module of the standard and any other modules that might be appropriate depending on the types of services you deliver. So for example, early childhood intervention has a specific module that also needs to be included. For a certification audit, the first bit is a stage 1 or pre-audit that makes sure that you've got the documentation and systems in place in line with the requirements of the standard. That stage 1 audit is normally done off-site to minimise any cost associated with travel or getting the auditor there, but it can be done on-site if you prefer. So if you like, it's an Are You Ready audit. So check to make sure that you've got everything in place. After that stage 1 audit, the auditor will give you a report that highlights any gaps in your system that you can address to make sure that when you get to your certification audit, you're as ready as possible, because of course we want everybody to get through their stage 2 audit successfully the first time round. During that certification audit, we come on site, normally with a team of 2 auditors. Once again, if there are special circumstances, we can apply to use one auditor only, but that is an individual case by case, and we must apply to the Commission for that approval. For the certification audit, it includes a review of your documentation and also records, as well as interviews with NDIS participants and also participant file reviews. Now, of course, participants can choose to be involved in the audit or not, but we do aim to talk to a range of people receiving services from you. Certification audit is valid for a period of 3 years, and annual surveillance audits are required to maintain your certification. During surveillance audits, they also include interviews with participants. And there is a magic number for how many people we speak to, and it's actually the square root of the number of participants that access your service. For a certification audit and for a surveillance audit, 0.6 times the square root of the number of participants accessing your service. So what happens if there is a non-conformance or we find some evidence of non-compliance? All that really means is a delay in the certification recommendation being made. So if there's a major non-conformance identified, that's documented, and we look to you to provide a corrective action plan of how you're going to address those issues. You have up to 3 months to address major non-conformances. We then look at any evidence that you've got of how you've addressed them, and once they're closed out, your certification or verification recommendation can be made. So it's just a delay. If there are minor non-conformances or small gaps in system compliance, then we only need a corrective action plan of how you're going to address those, and we then follow those up at the next regular audit in 12 months' time. So how do I make sure I can comply with the standards and the relevant modules? Firstly, it's very important to get a copy of the standard as well as any related regulations. So both the verification module 6 and the core module and related modules make reference to some of the NDIS regulations, for example, staff screening and incident reporting. So make sure you have a look at those. It's really good if you do a self-assessment or an internal audit first to make sure that you've got all the documentation records you need to demonstrate compliance. And of course, we're looking for evidence. So if a police check is needed, we're looking for evidence to see that that's being conducted. If you need particular insurance, we're looking for the evidence to make sure that that's in place. Or if there are policies or procedures required, we're looking to see that you have those documented and in place. If you do need certification audit, it's a good idea to have your stage 1 audit a couple of months ahead of your certification audit requirement. And during the stage 1 audit, the auditor will identify any potential gaps in your system and your processes.
Great, thank you very much, Patty. I'll hand over to Rod, who will do a deep dive into implementing a management system.
Thanks, Marcus. Before we talk about the strategic intent or purpose of a management system, it's probably best to define what one is. A management system can be defined as a set of policies, processes, and procedures used by an organisation to ensure that it can fulfil the tasks required to achieve its objectives. Or it's the way in which an organisation manages the interrelated parts of its business in order to achieve its objectives. Another way to say it is, it's how organisations ensure that things get done. It's how you do business, and it's not something that is separate or outside of your business. It's part of your business. And yes, it must meet the needs of the organisation, stakeholders, and interested parties by being fit for purpose. There are essentially 4 steps an organisation must take to successfully implement a management system. Step 1, define the system framework, involves understanding what you need and designing the requirements of the management system. This step also has a few of its own steps that we'll discuss in the next few slides. Step 2 is pretty self-explanatory, creating policies, processes, systems of work and documentation to support it. This step also has a number of steps that I'll get to a little later on. Step 3, implementing the system, is putting it into practice. Nothing should ever be designed for show. It must be useful and used where and when applicable. Step 4, testing effectiveness, involves monitoring and measuring, auditing, and continually improving your system. Understanding stakeholders' needs and expectations literally means answering the question about who else has an interest in what you are doing and what will satisfy them and what risks and opportunities are associated with them. The list of people who could be members of this group is usually a lot longer than most people realise. I'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide. In business, delivering anything on time, to budget, and to specified requirements will only happen with a commitment, which equals resources, which equals people and money from top management. Who is top management? Simply put, it refers to the people who pull the purse strings. In a small business, it's most likely you. In larger organisations, it may be the CEO or the executive leadership team. It's somebody who's got significant influence over the whole or a significant part of the business. Part 3 there is determine the scope of the management system. This is about knowing your business. Who do we serve? Where? What facilities? In what states or territories do we operate? It's also about identifying what risks are particular to this organisation or to this sector. Are there any opportunities specific to the sector or to the product or service that you supply? It's about setting limits, saying what's in and what's out and understanding why. 4, once we understand the limits of our scope, then we can determine what the actual thing that we do is. Sounds odd, but many businesses don't actually have this defined. And 5 is a way of managing the process that needs to be designed. Identifying stakeholders. Such a list may include regulators, auditing bodies, suppliers, governments like local council, for example, clients or participants in the case of the NDIS, and your own staff and subcontractors, and that's just a few. It's by no means meant to be a definitive list. Stakeholders usually come with a set of criteria that they want to bring to the table. A regulator, for example, provides a set of requirements that need to be considered, usually set by legislation, and there are a lot of other different compliance requirements. Other criteria may be contractual or set up internally by the organisation itself. Stakeholders can have a direct or indirect influence. Lobby groups may influence policy, which in turn will impact how you may do business. An auditor might want to see evidence of how you've considered these parties. That could mean that you have met with them or meet regularly with the groups, or that you have service level agreements in place, or you've considered a stakeholder or conducted a stakeholder analysis which ranks these groups in terms of their respective power and how positive they are in regard to your operations. Like I mentioned previously, top management has a critical role in the implementation and success of a management system. To fulfil their responsibilities, top management must have their awareness raised regarding the benefits of implementing a management system, financial and operational benefits. The dangers of not implementing a management system, failing to meet the compliance obligations is a big one. What current issues there may be, the cost of services, the cost of implementing, and issues around damaging perhaps the organisation's reputation if things aren't done correctly. Top management must be involved leading and driving every aspect of the implementation. While they can delegate responsibility for the actual doing, they must remain accountable for the outcome. So designing a management system, the scope. It may seem like an oversimplification. However, the concept behind it is actually very simple. It is a critical step to make sure that as a business you understand these 4 things. Like I mentioned previously, this is about deciding what's in and what's out in terms of the product or service you deliver. What are the compliance requirements? Some being requirements of the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, others by legislation, standards, codes of practice and the like. What are the specifications of the product and service we deliver? This also talks back to the compliance point. So if there are contractual requirements that these must be met, they also need to be considered here. Lastly, what part of a business or the locations where the business operates, where are we in terms of our physical location, states, territories and legal areas, etc. Understanding these things and putting a fence around them is critical. It's often referred to as understanding the context of our business. The organisational process model. So step 4 in designing a management system is designing a high-level process model view. This diagram represents a typical process model based on the value stream of whatever the product or service that is being provided. Note the core processes have been identified, and alongside them exist the management processes and the support processes that must be in place so a business can consistently deliver the output to the end users and make sure it's to their satisfaction, it's their customer satisfaction that's paramount. Looking at the business like this also helps identify and understand risks, opportunities, skill gaps, training needs. It also assists to identify the steps within the core processes where monitoring and measurement should take place. For a process, any process, like the one on the previous slide, there are some fundamentals to ensure that we continue to get a consistent outcome. One, document control. Where a process is documented, we are using the current version. Our changes are updated, dates to that version tracked and recorded. By documented, we don't necessarily mean a written document either. In two, who owns the process and is responsible for the above, or at least for ensuring the process is maintained and up to date. Three, how do we know that we have a quality product or service? Are we meeting the criteria? Includes compliance and the needs and specifications of our clients. What do we measure? Where in the process do we take measurements? And what is classed as a quality output? And what records are retained or kept? So, the last slides have covered off on the fundamental design stages of a management system. Now on to development. Point one, conduct a gap analysis using context of organisation, scheme rule and applicable regulations. Talking about context. So as we discussed earlier, the context is what you should know about the space you operate in and your business's place within that space. For example, we are a provider of XYZ products using funding from ABC, operating in an area or within an aged care facility XYZ. So a gap analysis will tell us where we are compliant, i.e. where we are meeting the expectations of those interested parties, including things like regulations and scheme rules. And when we talk about scheme rules, we talk about documented processes. The scheme rules may be, in this case, a scheme would be the NDIS. If you're in a business where you were manufacturing or working with medical devices, there may be other schemes that would be applicable as well. So that's what they mean by that term, scheme rules, which is a little bit of a possibly complex. So where your business, due to risk or complexity, or legislation requires documented processes, now's the time to document them. Not necessarily write them, as you could use video or diagrammatic flowcharts or even templates as documentation, just as long as it's an auditable record and it shows evidence that you understand the processes. And three, define suitable controls. Where controls and the need for measures are identified, they must be defined, including the specifications, levels and limits, etc. Conducting a gap analysis, it requires using context of an organisation, the scheme rule, there's that word again, and applicable regulation. So it's knowing what we need, and that's confirming the requirements of the interested parties, establishing the criteria. The second part is reviewing existing business operations and processes, finding out how we currently do what we do, and review, interview, observe, and have a look at process controls. Finally, the outcome is evaluating the results and determining the action needed. Are we compliant? If not, what's missing or what needs updating? There's a few examples on this slide on the format of documents. So they can be text-based, flowcharts, or combinations of text and flowcharts. However, like I said before, there may also be a diagrammatic video or even templates of existing pieces of work, depending on the complexity and the needs of the users. However, as a minimum, a documented process should include the purpose, so we know why we're doing it, the scope, which is the limits of where it starts and finishes, responsibility and authority, description of the activities, and the records that are required to be kept. So, what are the risks and what will we monitor to keep risk at an acceptable level? How will we monitor it? How often? What are the acceptable limits? And how do we make sure that it's only the critical few and not the unnecessary many that we monitor and measure? So it needs to be a balanced approach. And customer relationship management is one of the things that we particularly need to look at monitoring and measuring the performance of our product or service delivery, our process performance, how efficient and effective we are, and the performance of our resources. Considerations for implementation. A project mindset will be necessary to ensure the best outcome. It will include making sure that you set tasks to timelines with specific outcomes and well-defined responsibilities for their achievement. Regular review and tracking of progress against milestones is also essential. All users must be trained and educated on the use of the management system. In fact, those who would be the users should not only be consulted, but be active participants in the process to create the system. Again, top management must provide encouragement, time and resources to ensure the project is successful. The size and makeup of the implementation team is dependent upon the size and complexity of the business. It may only include the business owners in a partnership or a small or sole trader structure. In larger organisations, the team could include senior leadership, quality managers, subject matter experts and operators. However, regardless of the size and number of participants, the team should meet regularly and track progress, discuss issues and new activities. A communications plan or training program must be developed. Once again, the level and complexity of such is dependent on the size, the geographic spread, mix and type of personnel, and the tasks they perform. The key in any case is to ensure that all personnel are made aware of and trained in all aspects of the management system. And remember, we're talking about the business here, not something new or completely outside of what they normally do. Change management is the term that's been used extensively in business for a couple of decades now, but it's simply a way of referring to the need for people to accept new things and to buy into change rather than resist it. Cultural change can be slow, and it needs to start with the tone at the top. I like the phrase, tell me and I won't, ask me and I might, include me and I will. And the key to management is participation. From an audit program's point of view, the best way to ensure that your business is ready for an external audit is to conduct an internal audit. So the objective of an internal audit is to verify the system is continuing to work as it is intended, and it helps you detect any deterioration that might be occurring within the system. The audit process should be to define the audit objective, scope and criteria, plan to prepare audit work documents, conduct the audit to an agreed schedule, and reach conclusions and report the outcomes. Measuring performance should be ongoing. Once again, depending upon complexity, you may consider using statistical techniques to understand changes or variability in outputs and use the results to help you in your decision making about changes and improvements to your processes. The audit program will also assist by providing data for this as well. The term management review actually means that management should regularly meet to assess the business, plan and act to correct and improve the business. It's something all businesses should do regardless of whether or not they have a formally implemented management system. Ultimately, it's the customers who determine how well your business is performing, and we get feedback from them in various ways. So the reason why we get this feedback is to verify our performance and generate improvements. So they're the beneficial things that we get from customer feedback. The good ways of doing this is through periodically reaching out and contacting your clients, and this may be through sending surveys or just cold calling some of your clients, looking at the results of your service that you've delivered to the clients, and of course the review of complaints. And that will give you a great idea of the level of satisfaction, because it's all about how the customer or the end user perceives your level of service. Corrective action, when things go wrong, and they will, when there's a complaint or an incident or a failure, it's essential to address it in a formal and structured manner. So the way that it should best be done is to allocate responsibilities to people in the case of a complaint or the requirement for a corrective action. That allocation is usually done by top management or whoever is accountable for the corrective action. Put in place an interim fix, which is known as a correction rather than a corrective action. Conduct a root cause analysis, which is literally find out how it happened, and put in place a corrective action, which is just something that will make sure it won't happen again. And don't just set and forget, conduct follow-up, come back and make sure that the actual fix works as it intended before you actually then go and close out the action. Continual improvement. Effective management system will have continual improvement built in. It's got its focus on increasing the effectiveness and the efficiency of an organisation to fulfil its policy and objectives. It will deliver ongoing improvement of services or processes through incremental and breakthrough improvements. And lastly, continual improvement should be a permanent objective of the organisation. This particular slide talks to the plan, do, check, act model, and essentially every process that's done really relies on this. There's the planning or thinking about what needs to be done, implementing it, measuring its effectiveness, seeing where there might be gaps or room for improvement, then acting to put that improvement in place, and doing that continually will ensure that you have improvement through the life cycle of your business management system.
Great, thank you very much, Rod. So using that information that we've just gone through, do you now feel like you have the confidence to improve your management system? Yes, no, or maybe? I'll give you about 20 seconds more to answer the poll question. Great. I'll now pass back to Patty.
So why partner with SAI Global? In terms of audit coverage, we do aim to deliver the best in quality and audit services right around the globe. In Australia, we do have auditors based in all states of Australia except Tasmania. So we can send local audit teams out to audit your system to minimise any travel costs. SAI Global as an organisation conducts over 100,000 audits annually. Obviously, that's not just to the NDIS, but covers a whole array of standards. And we audit in quality management system, but also a range of disability and human services standards, health standards, occupational health and safety standards, environmental standards, food, and also in other sectors. We do measure our customer satisfaction regularly, and we do set ourselves some tough targets around that. So we're getting 95% customer satisfaction ratings at the moment, and we're always aiming to improve that. So for us, feedback is always very important too. We do have a lot of industry experience, and we have over 15 years in the disability and human services sectors. In fact, starting out when the first employment services standards, the disability service standards, started, I think 18 years ago now. So we're able to provide local expertise and delivered with sensitivity. Something organisations are always worried about is participant interviews and how they're conducted. So we always try and make sure to do the interviews in a relaxed environment, very often over a cup of coffee or tea, so that we can get the best feedback we can from the participants, so that we can provide you with the overall feedback. We keep things private and confidential, of course, but we can let you know generally how you're going and what participants are saying around how your services could be improved.
Great, thank you very much. So if you would like to be contacted about your NDIS audit, or to further your understanding in internal auditing or implementing a quality management system, then please check one of those boxes. You can pick more than one box if you would like, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Great, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thank you.